ಒಪ್ಪಿದ್ರು. ಸೊ ಫಸ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಪೆಗ್ಗಿ ಅವ್ರ ಪರಿಚಯ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನವ್ರಿಗೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಬಟ್ ಆದರೂ ಒಂದು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಪರಿಚಯ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಪೆಗ್ಗಿ ಅವರು ಟ್ರಿನಿಡಾಡ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್. ಸೊ ಅವ್ರ ತಂದೆ ಟ್ರಿನಿಡಾಡ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್, ತಾಯಿ ಕೆನಡಾದವರು. ಸೊ ಅವರು ಮೊದಲು ಓದಿದ್ದು ಟ್ರಿನಿಡಾಡಲ್ಲಿ, ಮಾಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಮಿಚಿಗನಲ್ಲಿ PhD ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ಅಗೇನ್. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಭೋಜ್ಪುರಿ ಆಫ್ ಟ್ರಿನಿಡಾಡ್. ಸೊ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವರು ಇನ್ನೊಂದೆರಡು ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಫೀಲ್ಡಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಅನಿಮೇಷನ್ ಸೀರೀಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಈ ಕನ್ಫೆಷನ್ ಟೆರರಿಸಮ್ ಕೇಸ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕನ್ಫೆಷನ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಸೆಸ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೂ ಆ ಫೀಲ್ಡಲ್ಲೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಸೊ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ 2 ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಬರೆದ್ರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ನಾವು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡಿರೋ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ವಾಂಡರ್ಸ್ ಮರ್ಚೆಂಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಬಂತು, ಫಾದರ್ ಟಂಗ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮದರ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅಂತ. ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಕೃತಿಗಳ ವಿಶೇಷ ಅಂದರೆ ದೇ ಆರ್ ಭಾಷಾಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಇರೋ ಬುಕ್ಸ್ಗಳಾದರೂ ಒಂಥರ ನರೇಟಿವ್, ಒಂಥರ ಫಿಕ್ಷನ್ ಥರ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ಓದಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಹೆಗ್ಗಳಿಕೆ ಇದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಕಾರಣ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅವರು ಫಿಕ್ಷನ್ ರೈಟರ್ ಕೂಡ. ಅವರು ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮುಂಚೆ 2 ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಬರೆದ್ರು. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಐ ಫರ್ಗಾಟ್ ದ ನೇಮ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಒನ್, ಬಟ್ ದ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ಈಸ್ ಯಂಗೆಸ್ಟ್ ಸಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್, ಇಫ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ನಾಟ್ ರಾಂಗ್. ಸೊ ಅದು ಕೂಡ ಗುಜರಾತಿನ ಫೋಟಾ ಕೇಸಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ವಿಟ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಸೆಸ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಅದು ಅವ್ರ ರೈಟಿಂಗನ್ನು ಅಸೆಸ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ರು. ಅದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಆಗಿ ಅವರು ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವೆಲನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಬರೆದ್ರು. ದ್ಯಾಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಎಪಿಸೋಡ್. ಸೊ ಹಾಗೆ ಅವರು ಅದಾದಮೇಲೆ, ಆಸ್ ಐ ಸೆಡ್, ಶಿ ಹಸ್ ಕಮ್ ಅಪ್ ವಿತ್ ಅ ನ್ಯೂ ಬುಕ್ ನೌ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಪೆಗಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಅಗೇನ್. ಸಂಕೇತ್ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನವರು, ಧಾರವಾಡ, ಗೋಕಾಕ್ ಅವರು. ಸೊ ಅವರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲೇ ಸಾಫ್ಟ್ವೇರ್ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ಸ್ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸೇರಿ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಬೆಳೆಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಈಗ. ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಸೇಸ್ ದಟ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ವೇಸ್ ಎ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಎನಿವೇಸ್. ಬಟ್ ಅವರದ್ದು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಬುಕ್ಕು, ಬಟ್ ಅವರು ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಬ್ಲಾಗ್ ಬರಿತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಅವ್ರ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ 2-3 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡು ಪನರು ಅಂತ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಮ್ಯಾಗಝಿನ್ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಈ ಬಿನ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ವೈಟ್ ಫ್ರೀಕ್ವೆಂಟ್ಲಿ ದೇರ್ ಟು. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇಬ್ರಿಗೂ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಪುಸ್ತಕ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸಂಕೇತ್ ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ಗೆ. ದೆನ್ ದೇ ವಿಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಅ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್. ಆಮೇಲೆ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಓಪನ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆಡಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ಸ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್ ಅಗೇನ್. ಓವರ್ ಟು ಯು.
So, Peggy, in Wanderers, Kings, Merchants, the blurb says that many Indians are bilinguals, in fact, multilinguals, right? So in fact, probably this event is also going to be bilingual. So I'll start by setting the context for our audience in Kannada. I'll speak for a few minutes, and then we will converse in English, and then towards the end we will open it for any question answers, or if anybody wants to add to the discussion, that can be in Kannada as well as English. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ವಾಂಡರರ್ಸ್, ಕಿಂಗ್ಸ್, ಮರ್ಚೆಂಟ್ಸ್, ದ ಸ್ಟೋರಿ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಥ್ರೂ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಸ್ ಎಂಬ ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನು ಬರೆದ ಪೆಗಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಆಗಿದೆ ಇದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ. I think it has some edition now. The Wondrous Kings Merchants, 14 editions, 15 editions. It's widely popular. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So yeah. ಸೊ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವರು ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಫಾದರ್ ಟಂಗ್ ಮದರ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅನ್ನುವ ಒಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನ ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಪೆಗಿ ಅವರೊಂದಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಕೆಲವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳುವ ಮೊದಲು ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ವಾಂಡರ್ಸ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಮರ್ಚೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಎನ್ನುವ ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕವಾಗಿ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಅದು ನಾನು ಮುಂದೆ ಕೇಳುವ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಕಾಂಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಸ್ಥೂಲವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದಾದ್ರೆ, ಪೆಗ್ಗಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರ ವಾಂಡರರ್ಸ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಮರ್ಚೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನುವ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ಕಾಲದಿಂದಲೂ ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ ಆದ ವಲಸೆಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಭಾರತದ ಒಳಗಡೆನೆ ಆದ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳ ವಲಸೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅದು ಈ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಬೆರೆಯುವುದರಿಂದ ಅವು ನಮ್ಮ ನುಡಿಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಪ್ರಭಾವವನ್ನು ಬೀರಿದ್ವು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇದೆ. ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಲೆಕ್ಕವಿಲ್ಲದಷ್ಟು ಭಾಷೆಗಳು, ಉಪಭಾಷೆಗಳು ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ. ಅವು ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು, ಅವುಗಳ ವಿಕಾಸ, ಇದೆಲ್ಲದರ ಕುರಿತು ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಆ ಪ್ರಕ್ರಿಯೆಗಳ ಕುರಿತು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಭಾಷೆಗಳು ಚಲನಶೀಲವಾದದ್ದು, ನಿರಂತರವಾಗಿ ಬದಲಾಗ್ತಾನೂ ಇರ್ತವೆ. ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರಕಾರ, ಇದೆಲ್ಲದರ ಹಿಂದಿರುವ ಪ್ರಕ್ರಿಯೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಹೇಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತವೆ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಗಂಡು ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಪಾತ್ರ ಏನು, ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಪಾತ್ರ ಏನು, ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯದವರ ಪಾತ್ರ ಏನು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನ ಯಾಕೆ ನಾವು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ನುಡಿಗಳ ಬೆರೆಯುವಿಕೆ ಹಿಂದೆ ಅವರ ಪಾತ್ರ ಏನಿದೆ, ಮತ್ತು ಆ ಒಗಟನ್ನು ಬಿಡಿಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರ ಪಾತ್ರ ಯಾಕೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಈ ರೀತಿಯ ಕುತೂಹಲಕರ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿವೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಉತ್ತರಗಳು ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನು ಓದಿದಾಗ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇದರ ಮೂಲಕ ಪೆಗಿಯವರು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾವೀಗ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಇಂಡೋ ಆರ್ಯನ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಆ ರೀತಿಯ ಬಳಕೆಯನ್ನು ಸಹಿತ ಅವರು ಪ್ರಶ್ನಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಹಿತ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷೆಗಳ ಹುಟ್ಟು ಮತ್ತು ಅವುಗಳ ವಿಕಾಸದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೇಲ್ವರ್ಗದವರ ಮಹತ್ವವನ್ನು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಒತ್ತಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಅವರು ಅದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಸರಿ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಯನ್ನು ಅವರು ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ಮಾಡುವ ಕ್ರಮ ಅದಕ್ಕೇನು ಅವರ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಮೆಥಡಾಲಜಿ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದು ತುಂಬಾ ಆಸಕ್ತಿಕರವಾಗಿದೆ. ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಭಾಷಾಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞರು, ಈ ಲಿಂಗ್ವಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಫಿಲಾಲಜಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಅವರ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಇರೋದು ಪದಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಥವಾ ವೊಕ್ಯಾಬ್ಯುಲರಿ ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಗತ್ಯಕ್ಕಿಂತಲೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಅವರು ಒತ್ತು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಮಹತ್ವವನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಆದರೆ ಪೆಗಿ ಅವರು ಹೇಳೋದೇನೆಂದರೆ, ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವೊಕ್ಯಾಬ್ಯುಲರಿ ಇಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಿ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್. ಅದು ಬದಲಾಗ್ತಾನೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಹೊಸದು ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಹಳೆಯದು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ನೋಡಬೇಕಾದದ್ದು ಅದಲ್ಲ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ. ಸೊ ಪೆಗಿಯವ್ರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಅದು ಮೇಲೆ ನಮಗೆ ಕಾಣುವ ಪದಗಳ ಸಾಮ್ಯತೆ ಇರಬಹುದು, ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸ ಇರಬಹುದು, ಅದನ್ನು ಬದಿಗೆ ಸರಿಸಿ ಅದರ ಆಳಕ್ಕೆ ಇಳಿದು ಒಂದು ನುಡಿಯ ವ್ಯಾಕರಣ ಮತ್ತು ಅದರ ಧ್ವನಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ, ಅದರ ಲಕ್ಷಣಗಳನ್ನ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಕೆಳಗೆ ಇಳಿಯೋದು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಅದಕ್ಕೂ ಒಂದು ಕಾರಣ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅವರು ನಮಗೆ ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಡೋ ಒಂದು ಮಾದರಿ ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ 2 ಪದರಗಳ ಮಿಶ್ರಣ ಇದೆ. ಒಂದು ಮೇಲ್ಪದರ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ತಳಪದರ, ಸಬ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಟಮ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದು. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಳಿದು ತಳಪದರವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಶೋಧಿಸಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ಲಕ್ಷಣಗಳನ್ನ ಕಂಡುಕೊಂಡು, ಈಗ ಮೇಲ್ಪದರ ಅಥವಾ ನಾವು ಈ ವೊಕ್ಯಾಬ್ಯುಲರಿ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದು ಬಟ್ಟೆ ಇದ್ದಂಗೆ, ಮೇಲ್ಹೊದಿಕೆ ಅಥವಾ ಒಡವೆಗಳು ಆ ರೀತಿದು. ಆದರೆ ತಳಪದರ ಏನಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲುಬುಗಳು, ಸ್ನಾಯುಗಳು. ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ನುಡಿಯನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ನೀವು ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಚೌಕಟ್ಟನ್ನು, ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತದೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ಭದ್ರವಾಗಿ ಹಿಡ್ಕೋತದೆ. ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ ನೀವು ಪದಗಳನ್ನ ಅದೇ ನುಡಿಯದಿರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ ಬೇರೆಯಿಂದ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಎರವಲು ತಂದದ್ದಿರಬಹುದು, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತನ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ತಗೊಂಡದಿರಬಹುದು. ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಈಗಂತೂ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಿಂದ ತಗೋತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಪದಗಳನ್ನ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಸೇರಿಸ್ತಾ ಹೋಗಬಹುದು. ಆದರೆ ಹೀಗೆ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅದರ ಕೆಳಗಡೆಯ ಚೌಕಟ್ಟು ಏನಿರ್ತದೆ ಅದು ಬದಲಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಥವಾ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯ ವಿದ್ಯಮಾನ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಹತ್ವದ್ದೇನೋ ಒಂದು ಘಟಿಸಿದೆ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಒಂದು ನಾವು ತುಂಬಾ ಅನಗತ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿರ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಅವರು ಈಗ ಮಲಯಾಳದ ಉದಾಹರಣೆ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ನಾವು ಮಲಯಾಳ ಇಸ್ ಫುಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಮಲಯಾಳ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಭೂಯಿಷ್ಠವಾಗಿದೆ. ಮಲಯಾಳ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಮಲಯಾಳ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಬಹಳ ಜನರಿಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇವನು ಉತ್ತರ ಭಾರತದವರಿಗೂ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಪದಗಳಿವೆ ಅಂತ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಅಷ್ಟಿಷ್ಟು ತಿಳಿಯುವುದು ಬೇರೆ, ಅದು ಅವರು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಮಲಯಾಳ ವಾಕ್ಯವನ್ನು ಯಾರಿಗಾದ್ರೂ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟೇ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಇರಲಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಅವರು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕಾಗುತ್ತಾ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಆ ರೀತಿ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನೋಡಬೇಕಾದದ್ದು ಅದರ ಬುನಾದಿಯ ಪದಗಳನ್ನ, ಅದು ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದಗಳನ್ನ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಅದರ ಧ್ವನಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿಯನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಅದು ಎಷ್ಟೇ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಶಬ್ದಗಳಿದ್ರೂ ಅದು ಒಂದು ದ್ರಾವಿಡ ಭಾಷೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಧ್ವನಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಪೆಗಿ ಅವ್ರ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಚರ್ಚಿಸುವ ಒಂದು ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯ ಲಕ್ಷಣ, ಇದನ್ನ ಅವರು ದ DNA ಟ್ಯಾಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೌತ್ ಏಷ್ಯನ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಇನ್ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ದ ಸೌತ್ ಏಷ್ಯನ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ಸ್ ಆಸ್ ವೆಲ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ರಿಟ್ರೋಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಷನ್, ಮೂರ್ಧನ್ಯ ಅಥವಾ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಡಚುಲಿ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಈ ಟ ಠ ಡ ಢ ಣ ಅನ್ನುವಾಗ ನಮ್ಮ ನಾಲಿಗೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಮಡಚಿ ಹೊಡೆಯುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದರೆ ಅದು ಮಡಚುಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಯಾಕೆ ಅದರ ಅರ್ಥ ನಮಗೆ ತಿಳಿಯುತ್ತದೆ. ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಒಂದು ಏರಿಯಲ್ ಫೀಚರ್, ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾದೇಶಿಕ ಲಕ್ಷಣ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಗೆಟಿವಿಟಿ ಅನ್ನುವ ಒಂದು ಬಹಳ ವಿಲಕ್ಷಣವಾದ ಒಂದು ವಿಲಕ್ಷಣತೆ ಇದೆ ಒಂದು ಕೆಲವು ಭಾಷೆಗಳಿಗೆ. ಈ ಹಿಂದಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನ ನಾನು ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಅವರೇ ವಿವರಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದು ಈ ಇಂಡೋ ಆರ್ಯನ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಕರೆದಾಗಲೂ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸಬ್ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಒಂದು ಉಪಕುಟುಂಬ ಇದೆ, ಅದು ಮಾಗಧಿ ಭಾಷೆಗಳದು. ಅದು ಇಂಡೋ ಆರ್ಯನ್ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಬ್ರಾಡ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಲೇಬಲ್ ಇದ್ದಾಗಲೂ ಸಹಿತ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸಗಳಿವೆ. ಒಂದು ಗ್ರಾಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕಲ್ ಜೆಂಡರ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ. ಗ್ರಾಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕಲ್ ಜೆಂಡರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹಿಂದಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದಕ್ಕೂ, ಈ ಕುರ್ಚಿ, ಮೇಜು, ಪುಸ್ತಕ, ಬಸ್ಸು, ಕಾರು ಎಲ್ಲದಕ್ಕೂ ಒಂದು ಜೆಂಡರ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಅದು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಗೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಬೇರೆ ದ್ರಾವಿಡ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗೆ ಮಾಗಧಿ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಾದ ಪೆಗಿ ಅವರದೇ ಭೋಜ್ಪುರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಲಿ, ಬಂಗಾಲಿ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ರೀತಿಯ ಜೆಂಡರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಾಮಪದಗಳಿಗೆ ಲಿಂಗ ಅನ್ವಯ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಅದು ಯಾಕೆ ಹಾಗೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಅದೊಂದು ಅಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬಿಡಬಹುದು ನಾವು. ಆದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದೇನಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣಗಳೇನು ಅಂತ ಹುಡುಕ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಕೆಲವು ವಿಲಕ್ಷಣತೆ ಇರುತ್ತವೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಲ್ಲೂ. ಅದು ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಈಗ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಯ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲದರಲ್ಲೂ ಇರ್ತವೆ, ಅದು ನಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಬಳಸ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ. ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಉದಾಹರಣೆ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಂಪೌಂಡ್ ವರ್ಬ್ಸ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ವೆಕ್ಟರ್ ವರ್ಬ್ಸ್, ಲೈಟ್ ವರ್ಬ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು, ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದಗಳು, ಲಘು ಕ್ರಿಯಾಪದಗಳು ಅಂತ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಈಗ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇದೆ, ಸಂಜೆ 5ಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇದೆ, ಬಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿ. ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇದೆ, ಬಂದು ಬಿಡು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ರೀತಿ. ಅದು ಬಾ ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಂದು ಬಿಡು ಮೇಲ್ನೋಟಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದೇ ಅರ್ಥ ಆದ್ರೂ ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸೂಕ್ಷ್ಮವಾದ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಈಗ ಬಾ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಕ್ರಿಯೆ, ಬಿಡು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕ್ರಿಯೆ, ಅದು ಒಂದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಬಂದು ಬಿಡು ಅನ್ನೋ ಆ ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಬಾ ಅನ್ನುವ ಕ್ರಿಯೆಯನ್ನ ಅದು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪೂರ್ಣಗೊಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಯಾಕೆ ಬಂತು? ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ ಇದೆ, ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ಯಾಕೆ? ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಡೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷಾಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞರು ಈ ಥರದ್ದನ್ನ ನೋಡೋದು ಇಲ್ಲ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಡೆ. ಇದು ಯಾಕೋ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಡೋದಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಆದರೆ ಅಂಥವನ್ನೇ ಇವರು ಇಂಥ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಪುಟ್ಟ ಸುಳುಹುಗಳನ್ನ ಹಿಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪೆಗಿ ಈ ನುಡಿಗಳು ಹೇಗೆ ಬೆರೆತ್ವು ಅನ್ನೋದರ ರಹಸ್ಯವನ್ನ ಭೇದಿಸೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಅದ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ನಿಮಗೆ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ. ಇಷ್ಟು ಸಾಕು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಬಾರ್ದು. ಈಗ ನಾನು ಪೆಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೆಲವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ತಾವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳಬಹುದು, ಅಥವಾ ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಕೇಳೋರಿದ್ರು ಕೇಳಬಹುದು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಏನು ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸೋದಾದ್ರೆ ಕೇಳಬಹುದು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. Peggy, thanks for bearing with me. I hope you got some of that, because you've been in your new book, at least I saw a lot more examples in Kannada and so on. So I guess you will maybe if you spend more time in Manipal and Bangalore, you will start picking up Kannada. So I want to start by asking you a question, a more general question on that we all seem to have this curiosity, or more than curiosity, maybe I want to say it's a fixation with the past, right? Now, of course, it's one thing for researchers to look to the past and try and understand, and make sense of it. David Reichs and other researchers work on the ancient DNA analysis, for example, clearly shows migration patterns, and not just for India, but across the globe, right? For example, we learned that Europe, the Western Europe, was repopulated twice over, basically, right, through migrations and so on. Right, there's massive population replacements that have happened, in the long arc of history. But it's like I said, it's one thing for researchers to ponder over these questions and try to understand these and so on. But for ordinary people, why do we care so much about the past, and why does it affect our day to day, all the time, and why do we get into a lot of contentious issues because of distant past, that happened, thousands of years ago, which has no relevance for us, probably right now.
Okay, about why are we interested in the past? I think that this is something that is growing. It is last year it was important, this year it is more important. I'm finding that the focus on languages, on translations, is growing. For the first time, I've had to do interviews in Hindi, which previously with this kind of book, it's a technical book, people were not so curious. And now I find the curiosity is growing. I don't completely understand why migration is important, except that maybe some clues, some hints have begun to come, and some things can't come. Like, for example, the Dravidian story is too recent to be manifested in, say, genes which are different from the Indus Valley to the south. It's the same genes. And people say, okay, so the percentage of Dravidian DNA looks about the same in both places. But we can't say, what is the difference? Who are the Indus Valley people? Who are the people from the south? So linguists have a place to look at things that could have led to the migration. One of the things that I find is I am in a position, because of my models on how people migrate, how languages evolve, to start making a few guesses about the settlement of the South. Nobody has written about it. Archaeologists are not certain. Geneticists are only guessing, because 4,000-5,000 years is really nothing in terms of genetics. But we find that suddenly people are, as they're curious, and one is finding that there are patterns that repeat. Like what happened when the Indus Valley people headed south is repeated by what happened when Dakhini was formed, and men from the north came, met women and ordinary people from the south. There's enough evidence that the same things happened. What happened to Urdu when it became Dakhini seems to be like what happened to Indus Valley language. One little feature taken out when it settled in the south. And it's interesting to be able to use a model as a compass and try to guess at our past, to listen and find that some of my theories are working as I listen to him and I can follow what he's saying because there are enough words I know, but I don't know Kannada well enough to hear that layer where the grammar is, though I know it is there. I know I would understand it, but it's more obscure to me because it's encased in older words. So in a way, I am curious as to why this is the year that it's all happening. Uh, but it's a good thing, and it's something that can only be done here because if people tried to do it abroad, they would miss a lot of things. They would not have access. Like I wanted to find out to check a word in Tamil yesterday, and a guy came to fix my Wi-Fi in the hotel. So I asked him, and we started discussing all of this, and he was curious. And so I was able to improve my PowerPoint and correct a few spellings. So these kinds of things, people are wondering now. I'm sitting in my home, I'm wondering about the settlement of Nepal, and my housekeeper knows a language from the high Himalayas. She understands enough to help me give me data. So, what is happening all of a sudden? I get this lovely feeling that the 12th century was a magical time in the whole subcontinent when new languages came. And I feel a sense of that again, that many people who previously didn't know English are curious about the things that have been discussed in English, and they want enough so that they can discuss it themselves in a language that they are more comfortable in. And if that is happening, it's a very positive sign in the country. We're back in the 12th century, which was another golden age. I hope it's that.
Well, I mean, I hope the digging of the past is yields more positive results and then not so many. Yeah. Uh, uh, Coming back to the wondrous kings merchants. So you introduced the concept of substratum in the opening chapter there, right? And you use it to explain the process of pigeonization and creolization and
Taken out the pigeonization.
yeah, I know. I'm coming to that as well, right? And so my question though is more on the substratum itself, right? So what is the substratum, for example, and how should we think about it, right? And what is the interplay, between the substratum and the process of language formation, through the different stages that you have spoken of, right? And why is it so important for us to understand, the substratum?
Okay, let's not use a scary word like substratum. In a way, we are talking about the basic sounds of the language. Um, all the languages of India have turned. Some have n and l. Up in the far northwest, it's sh, which does not exist in the south. And we have these features going, in fact, all the way into the Andamans, all the way to Australia. This is a sort of a sign of the first people ever to migrate out of Africa. So it takes us back 70,000 years. So when you're thinking that you say "rna" or "erla," and that it's probably something recent and just Dravidian. It's not, it's old. It is 70,000 years plus. You get echoes in Africa, you get echoes in Australia. Yeah. So you have that. You have, let's use the word grammar, but grammar is a confusing word for a lot of people. Let us say it's an operating system. You have your data you want to input into the computer, but if it doesn't have a program to handle the data, it can't do anything. It needs something that is like cement holding your structure together. I have a photograph I often show of a mosaic I have made on my floor in my terrace. I've made an octopus, and its octopus is in all colors of granite. And people say, "Oh, that's an octopus." I said, "No, that is a metaphor of Malayalam. And they say, what do you mean? I say, because before there was an octopus, there was a floor. And that floor, the thing you are not seeing is the cement. Otherwise, all those pieces would fly in many directions and be of no use. It's, I have a dragon also, and somewhere else in the house. But the point being that nobody notices the cement and the old white pieces of marble, the color of the cement, which are the old Dravidian words. So those things which are holding it in place as a floor are overlooked. And we look at the glamorous, colorful octopus and dragon. I have also a snake somewhere. And we think, well, just like I was listening to him, I was hearing the words. I can't hear the substratum. I don't know Kannada well enough. Although, if I listen for some time, I would begin to find how many genders does it have, how are the pronouns different from Malayalam or Tamil. These little things I need to know better. But you need that operating system to hold all the pieces in place so the language can do what a language is supposed to do. You can add new words. Malayalam existed before it had those words. My floor existed before it had the octopus. But that important cement that held things together is easy to overlook. And that is the thing that tends to remain constant, because when people pick up a new language, and they're not picking it up because it's a hobby, it is not something they're learning in school, they're learning it because new people have come in the area and they have political power. And you realize, just as we pick up English words, they're useful to us, they help our children to get jobs. So in some way you want to see how you can adopt these words, but if you're adopting them for your purposes and not for somebody else's, why would you change your grammar as you do it? Why would you not continue speaking your language and just keep adding new words? And sometimes you would go back and forth, you would use your old words or your new words. So it's a very gradual process where we have something in the north called Hinglish, and I'm sure it exists here too, where so you find new words sneaking in along with the old grammar, and you're getting a kind of a fusion, because in a way people find it more comfortable to discuss these things in their own language and not in English. So this is what happened before the 12th century, where people were picking up these Prakrit words and sticking them into what must have been Indus Valley languages, and languages, of course, of the East as well. And slowly there came a day when there was so much of this in the languages that they didn't need the Prakrit and they didn't need the Indus Valley languages. They shed both the layers, and here was this new language, which was a fusion. All the languages of the North are in this form. And it's an exciting thing because it's not in our hands, it happens. And it doesn't happen because we love nouns and verbs. It happens because politically the country is going through changes and the language is merely reflecting them.
Thank you. So just on the the issue of pigeonization, and even in the in Wondrous Kings Merchants, in the later chapters, you actually do start questioning the need for that phase at all, right? And also that is this the only way of language mixture and creolization, the way it happened in the Caribbean, right? So, and in your new book, you're a lot more explicit about that, right? So, what are those the stages, and now what is a pidgin and what is a Creole, and what are those different stages? And also, what I don't know if you change your mind, because I did see the hints of that in your first book also, but then at least you seem to have probably expressing it a lot more clearly in the new book, that this is not necessarily the case. The pigeon phase is not necessarily the case. So can you talk a little bit more on those aspects?
Okay, I think when I was a student, about 20 years old, I joined the University of the West Indies. We were very excited because our language, Creole, was suddenly very important. It was a brand new language. We knew it had come up in a fusion. There was a substratum from West Africa. There was a top layer of, in our case, English words or French words. Suddenly, the language that we spoke, which we were told was just bad English, uh, was becoming center stage in linguistic theory. So somebody, obviously a foreigner, not one of us, said, "Oh, it must have come from a pigeon," because they thought that in Native American societies in the Pacific, there were pigeons where people seemed to speak a stripped down version of their language when they came into contact and they didn't know each other's language. I didn't find that likely in India. We did not have that kind of chaos. But we talked about something called a prakrit. What was a prakrit? What was a pigeon? And I, at that time, searching around, found a professor at Chicago. He's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Salikoko Mufwene. I wrote to him, and he said, "I'm finding the same thing you are finding, that there are no pigeons." And in fact, that in the West African coast, people, uh, when the Europeans came, they were fairly educated elite men who went up to them and said, "We can learn your language, so we can be interpreters for you." And they actually worked as interpreters, and these were only men coming because explorers are only men. They married local people and had children. Of course, the children knew both the languages. But the interesting thing is that the first phase was these children learning their father's language with a local accent, and these interpreters learning the European language with a local accent. You have this Prakrit phase where people are coming into direct contact with the newcomers. And then you look in the Vedic era and you find that here come the Vedic people who, again, geneticists tell us were almost only men. They need wives or they will be extinct. And there were again local men who were fairly educated and saying, "We will like to learn your language and we can be interpreters." And there's evidence on the Malabar coast of when the Portuguese came, of Brahmin men going and saying, "We will learn your Portuguese." So we have that first contact bringing a Prakrit, which is a Prakrit is pretty much the same as the foreigner's language or Sanskrit or English, except for a local accent and a few little tweaks. Let's say, "We are like this only," or "This is with me only," because we don't like to use the verb have, because have does not exist in any Indian language. This is very, but you're not violating English grammar. So we have the Prakrit phase. And then much later, if things continue like that, um, a lot of poor people start noticing that this language is of use. They are the ones who never meet the first migrants, and they start adopting the new words. And that is when you get a Creole situation coming. And according to this Professor Mufwene, that's how it happened in the US, in the Caribbean, where Africans did not develop these Creoles until there were large numbers of them never meeting the white people. And one more important thing, which I added, for the first time, they were women. Because when only men go, and they very few, when they're only men and they are in direct contact with the Europeans or with the Vedic people, they generate a Prakrit. I'm going to get very confused. Can you just stop the sound? And I can't handle it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you have men, just take it outside until you find it. I'm a very distractible person. Sorry about that. Yeah. So if there's only men and they're very small estates and everybody meets everybody, what you will get is a Prakrit. If there are huge estates and a lot of Africans, a lot of Indians who previously were not interested in the Vedic people, but they have been there for hundreds of years, so they're beginning to get interested. suddenly you have large groups of people, including women, including children. So the important thing that a pigeon is never formed in these circumstances. Pigeons are when men go temporarily to migrate. Like I need to go on a ship and I'm part of the crew of a ship. But his real world has not changed. He goes back home. His children are still the children he had in his village. The wife is the wife he had in the village. When the migration is over, he comes back. So the pigeon does not generate new families. It's a male thing and it's temporary. In the Caribbean, and we haven't had these situations much here. So, in that sense, so it was natural that not only were pigeons not in India, they were not in the Caribbean either. They may have been in Native American colonies and in the Pacific. So, in that sense, I got the wonderful opportunity to change the model, that the old model of Creoles was wrong, and the evidence from India and Africa was showing that, in fact, that is not the way it happened. In Africa and in India, there was a Prakrit phase. And then later on, it developed into Creoles. Interesting thing, Nigerian Pidgin English, you can't tell them apart by listening to them, Pigeons and Creoles. If I hear a Nigerian talking, I could think he is possibly from the same town as me in my island in Trinidad. But pigeons never erase the other local languages. People tend to learn both. But once you have a Creole, the Prakrit is gone, the old language is gone, everything. Creoles have a way of being a new fusion that changes everything. So, like if you have something like Hindi or Punjabi in the north, it means nobody is speaking Prakrit anymore, and nobody is speaking the Indus Valley languages. So they have fused and created this new thing, and that is all we have. So that is another one of the signs of a Creole. It creates a new life form, and the parents die.
Thank you. Um, and these Prakrits, which then became the Indo-Aryan languages, as we call them, have this very strange feature called, well, and probably not strange, but something unique about it, ergativity, right? And in my translation, that is probably the only word I left untranslated because I could not really translate it, and that was also the section that I had to spend a lot of time on to figure it out, and because it and then what you were explaining it, I was seeing a practical demo of it while I was translating it, because I, as a native Kannada speaker, this is for me not at all familiar, right?
Or for me,
Yeah.
I'm from the eastern part of North India.
Yeah. So can you explain what this feature is, and
Yeah, if you think about it, we take for granted in the South and in English and in Bengali that a sentence has a subject, an object, and a verb. But that's not always the way it is, because the first people coming out of Africa and in one or two other parts of the world, they don't believe that sentences have subjects. They have by me. So they don't say I ate the food or I eat the food. They say by me, food, eat. And they can do various things. The verb can agree with I and also with food. So they have two markers. To this day, in the Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh area, the tribes use two markers. So I eat the food, and or I food eat, and eat has markers for both. In the Indus Valley, especially up in the high Karakorams, we still have languages which do this in all the tenses. I food eat, an agreement is everything, but buy me food eat, buy me food will eat, buy me food ate, not eaten. These are Dravidian people, they didn't say eaten. Once upon a time, this eaten thing has come in via Sanskrit. So what we had was a tendency to imagine a sentence as not having subjects. So when the Sanskrit speakers came in, they could not handle this. They couldn't fathom it. They were like English, like modern South Indian languages, like Bengali. I ate the food. But over hundreds of years, people were bilingual, trilingual. They will speak their Sanskrit for doing their ceremonies, but they slip into their Prakrits and Indus Valley languages, which were most probably still alive, and they had these things. And you start seeing into Sanskrit, into the Prakrits, buy me food, eat. And they couldn't be eat because Prakrits have to follow Sanskrit Paninian rules. So we can say eaten. So suddenly it becomes a passive. Now, it was not meant to be a passive, but by compromising with, okay, Sanskrit will allow you to say eaten but not eat. Then you begin to get a funny sentence, buy me food eaten. And it makes sense that eaten, that should agree with the food. Of course, in the old days, it agreed with both of them. So you're seeing a compromise between the Sanskrit and Sanskrit grammar and the old grammars coming up. And what it has led to in the modern North Indian languages, Hindi has the most of it. Marathi has it, all of them have it. But Hindi is most marked. You will say, buy me food eaten, but you say, I eat the food. So all the other tenses are similar to a South Indian grammar, but the past tense retains this old notion that you can't say I ate, it is by me eaten. So this is just a way of seeing these first people out of Africa who blended with the first migration which created Dravidians in the northwest. And that was a substratum, this first Indian language. So in a way, you can say we have Proto-Dravidian, which incorporated this strange notion of a sentence, that subjects are not a thing. And we had the southern ones, which came later, where it phased out. And I have a lot of theories as to why it phased out, but I'll give you an example. If anyone here knows Dakhini, there's a joke that I heard in Hyderabad where northerner comes and says to a Dakhini speaker, Aapne namaz padhi? Did you do namaz? Aapne namaz padhi? Padhi is feminine. But he's talking to a man. And that's correct in Urdu because namaz is feminine. Aapne namaz padhi. This man gets really upset because it's not there in Dakhini, just as it's not in modern South Indian language. He said, Tu padhi ki nahi ke, aapun to pad liya. Which basically he says, you can read in the feminine or masculine. I don't know if you're a man or a woman, but I, masculine, have done my namaz. Because you can see from this is a total South notion that how can the verb agree with the object? It has to agree with the subject. And that is, you can't translate this into English. And no Hindi speaker will understand this joke. But you see that this is exactly the thing that got knocked out in the, I believe, in the first migrations of Dravidians south from the Indus Valley. If we believe the model, they were young men, the first ones. If they were young men, what did they do? They either went extinct or they got married. They married, who did they marry? They married people who would say, Tu padi ki nahi ke, aapan to pad liya. And they said, get rid of it, just subjects. And by the time more people started coming, and not that many came, now people stayed behind, the place didn't get depopulated. By the time more people came, they understood that now that we're in South, we don't say this. But we can do the rest of the Dravidian language, just get rid of this ergativity thing, and let's have subjects in our sentences, which we now have in modern languages. I think that's the easiest explanation I've ever given.
So,
Oh yeah, by the way, the Andamans has the same ergativity, and so does Australian Aboriginal languages. So it is something to do with that first migration out of Africa.
And that's also a feature of the language X that you were
Yes.
talking about.
Sure.
So now, you mentioned language X, in a bit of passing in your previous book, but in the recent book, that's like at the center of your work. So what is this language X? And then you go down, looking at each of those features and you start listing down the possible features that the language X had. So what is this language X? And I also know that you have a talk tomorrow coming up on that. But what is this language X? And what are its features? How did it sound like?
Okay.
Relevant to IVC and the Dravidians?
Okay. First of all, language X, because it's hypothetical, we are reconstructing. We will never hear it, because my metaphor is that if you dig up a grave, you will find bones. You will not find flesh. So the words are gone, long gone. Maybe they still exist in South India, but we will have to prove it. And I'm not very interested in words, because words anyway keep changing over time. So the substratum, the bones are still there. But if you can imagine that South India is a pretty large place, and it doesn't have one language, it has many. And it has tribal dialects, and there's enough difference between the languages that you couldn't really understand one from the other, the extremes. Do you think that the Indus Valley was less large at a time when there was less transport, less contact? They didn't even have fast horses. So, but miraculously, we have a single grammar, just as we have a single grammar largely over South India. Maybe that much variety was there too. So when we talk of it, we can't say we have found the Indus Valley language, because there were probably many of them. Maybe some special ones in the major cities. But so if we are trying to guess and we're not looking at words, we're in a good position, because we found that one thing that is common, which is the grammar, and to some extent the sounds. Maybe the further northwest you go, you get the sh, ch, j, which don't exist in anywhere except Pashto, Burushaski, and to some extent Sindhi. And down here, will you get other sounds, but you will get ter, der, ner, la. I'm not doing ter because Sanskrit is not yet there. It's not part of our thing. So you're getting you have a sense of what sounds have to have been there. I can add to that. There's certain Dravidian vowel sounds that we didn't think about. But how do I prove it? How would I do it? Like you have like adu. That sound is found here. It's found in Pashto also. It's found in Kashmiri. So is it possible that this is something that was there? We have certain features, but the point being that I'm going to look at a general X-ray picture of the language minus words, and maybe say, yes, Harappa. Harappa has a meaning for me. My son-in-law's family is from Harappa. So in a way, we have made a contact back. But so I will not find words. Words I will have to guess. I would probably look at South Indian languages and say the numbers are a little similar from one to the other. The pronouns are a little similar from one to the other. But a lot of basic words, especially nouns, change from one to the other. And we can't say. So language X is a hypothetical language. It's a reconstructed language. And at the moment, the only thing we're somewhat certain of is some of its bones, not its flesh.
Yeah, I mean, I do have many more questions, but I think I'll let some of the others also ask questions.
So I want to understand, what's the basis of your study? For example, is it a written stuff or is it a spoken, stuff?
Okay.
And because when you talk about written, we know that there is some politics, there, because a lot of research has been gone, in Kannada, where we are saying how the Kannada words came. The entire is based on the scriptures, which are mostly, the politicians, which is like kings and all those things. So in your thing, I'm trying to understand what's your basis, because are you studying the local common peoples, whatever the which is not written, is that the base, or
you're going and looking at some tribes who are not influenced. What I'm saying is there is not Prijan, Krael, all those transformations not happened, right? That's what I want to understand. What is the basis of your research?
Yeah.
The first question.
You'll have to remind me, because if you have two questions, I'll forget
Sure.
the first one.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask later.
Okay, I'll tell you. The basis is never going to be written, because if we're going back into 9,000 years, and we don't even know for a fact that the Indus Valley script is a script. It could be something else, and it's not been broken yet. People have all kinds of theories, but they have not managed to get the sound and the meaning of whatever is there on those seals yet. No, I'm doing something different. That if it looks like languages like Punjabi, Sindhi, Pashto to some extent, and some other languages higher up in the mountains, and then you can even extend into the Hindi belt and down into Marathi. If they have a common core of features which do not come from Sanskrit, can we find a way to triangulate backwards and guess at what they might have been that led to this present day thing which has survived, which is not linked to Sanskrit? So if you look at like the ergativity thing, and I'm telling you that in the modern languages of the Indus Valley periphery and even the Hindi belt and Maharashtra, you have this ergativity in the past tense only. Aapne namaz padhi, not aap namaz padhe. You have this, but if you look high up in the Karakorams, you find languages which still have something that is intuitively older, which is in all the tenses. And they also, some of them, the oldest languages up there, they have the same kind of agreement with subject, agents and objects. So you can have a notion that this looks like an older structure. You can get Hindi from this, but you can't get this from Hindi. That kind of thing. Why would they suddenly put it in all the tenses? Why would they add markers for objects and agents? When you get this also all over the Andamans and Australia and the tribes of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, this is the older form. So, and you find it actually in small pockets up in the Karakorams. So that way you have a reasonable confidence that you have found what led to this strange feature that has survived in languages like Hindi and Punjabi. And so I'm triangulating backwards. I'm looking at at times I don't know, like all the languages of this area have a distinction between Hua and Hogya, if you know what that means. The difference is, or Kaya, Kalya. It's something that says something is very definitely it happened. You can't partially eat something up. You can partially eat something, but you cannot partially eat it up. Well, this Kaliya has a sense of completedness. All the languages have it except in the high mountains. So I need to ask questions which I don't have an answer to. Is how old is this feature? It is there in the south. It's definitely there in the tribes of the north and the Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bengal area. So looking at things that have remained, that's to say the bones that are still in our languages, the dislike of too much detail in verbs. Another thing that's very Dravidian, for example, is we have gender in our verbs. Now, Sanskrit doesn't have that. In Sanskrit, khadati means he, she, or it eats. But in Hindi, it becomes khata hai, khati hai. And you would get this in pretty much all the South Indian languages except Malayalam, which has lost it. It had it at one time. So in these kinds of ways, you can look and see there's the bones of an old gender system which got overlaid with Sanskrit, which said, we agree with gender, but a book has a gender too, which it doesn't in the South. I mean, a book is not feminine in the South, as it is in Hindi. It's neuter in Marathi, it's masculine in Nepal, but that's a different matter. So the point is, we look at these features and we're able to make guesses about some things, but certain things we like you have in the south. I don't know all the languages, but ni, ningal, tangal. How old is it? I don't know. We don't have a lot of evidence, even in Sanskrit, that this goes back even 2,500 years. So so we're guided by that. I would love to say that this is a very Indian feature and that it's old, but I can't prove how old it is. So some things I have to say maybe. I don't know. But definitely the ergativity, the idea of gender, as in the Dravidian mold, you can triangulate backwards just looking at the DNA in the bones of modern languages. And so I don't look at written things, because there's another problem with written language is it tends to be elite, and the elite people have done funny things like the Prakrits. The Prakrit, Magadhan Prakrit does not sound Magadhan to me. I'm from that area. Rich people talked like that, but the poor did not have this substratum. So all these things come into the picture when we think about it.
There, or we have added it now because of the influence of this thing? That's one question.
That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
Enjoy answering.
And the second question is, see, there is a lot of migration happened from India to China during the 2nd century to 7th century. Right, and in fact, according to the linguists, they say that 35,000 words of Chinese is Sanskrit. Okay.
From Buddhism, yes.
Buddhism, right? 35,000. Is there a similar study there as well on this influence and understanding the migration impact?
About the Chinese thing, we get things like the word dhyana in Sanskrit going as jhan in Chinese and becoming zen in Japanese. But these are vocabulary items. They're not larger substratum items. But your comment about Parnini is something I have thought about, because first of all, to have a name like Parnini violates the Parninian rule. Rna cannot exist in Sanskrit except before t or d, or t or dh, right? But it is a very Dravidian rule for rna to come in between two vowels. And it's not only Dravidian, it's very Punjabi. You don't have khana, you have khana. And this is an old feature, so it means that there were, along with the Sanskrit Sandhi rules, there were older Dravidian Sandhi rules which were operating. And if your name is Parnini, and as they say his father's name was Parnina, it suggests to me that part of why he could see so well about the language was he was not a Brahmin, he was not from the community, he was a Pani. And the Panis, the Dravidian Sandhis added, Pani is the Poeni, who came, the Phoenicians. They were a trading community that lived there. It would make perfect sense to me that just as I don't fully understand at all Dravidian languages, but I'm talking about it now because things strike me that wouldn't strike you. To you, everything looks normal. But to me, strange things will leap out at me. I think that the idea that he should be so concerned with Sandhi would mean that he would be from a community that had different Sandhis from the Vedic people. That's my guess. I may be wrong. But if the name is Parnini and that violates his rules for grammar, it would suggest he's not a Vedic Brahmin. Yeah.
Good evening. In your book, you talk about how English is an invasive species I can just speak it to the mic. How English is an invasive species in India, and what's happened in Ireland with the languages, where the native languages just on the
potentially happen here. So, at the start of your talk, you also mentioned this is an exciting time like the 12th century. So, how do we reconcile these two things?
I think the optimism is the new thing and the pessimism is the older thing. I think that generally around the world, like you look at places like the Philippines, South Africa, you almost don't do anything in the local languages anymore. You can crack a joke with your friends. You will definitely not write a paper in it or translate a book into it. But I don't know. Everybody says, what is the future in India? And obviously, a historian is not supposed to talk about the future, but so far it was looking pessimistic that the languages will die because as poverty declines and people become more middle class, they will want to speak whatever they see middle class people speaking. That is inevitable. And the only way to keep the languages is to keep people poor. That's not desirable also. And then I said, but there are always surprises and there are other solutions we have not thought of. And it suddenly occurred to me that the fact that many people are going to read this kind of thing in Kannada or going to read other books in other Indian languages, and that there's a level, an amount of translation happening now that has not been happening in earlier years. Translators sat quietly in Mysore and felt nobody knew about them. But suddenly we're getting a sense of opening up and of curiosity. I've always felt that by putting a book like this into Kannada, people would be able to engage with the subject because even if they read it in English, they would much the little things they didn't catch, they would definitely catch now. And that's why I like the idea that like in schools, don't push children into English too fast because the biggest problem is apart from the children not talking for 5 years, you have the teacher not fully understanding the text, so there can't be a class discussion. The teacher doesn't want to be shamed that I didn't fully understand this. Whereas if the book was simultaneously in a local language, the teacher could clear her doubts and have a proper discussion in the class, and you would get children really engaging and adding to it. Some of the most intelligent questions that I've had in some of these talks of 10-year-old children. Like, if the Dravidians came from southern Iran, why did they come if they were farmers? Why would a farmer leave his land? I have to think about it, and there's an answer. But it took me a year or more to come up with the answer that maybe that like a lot of young men everywhere, as the country becomes more developed, they get less jobs. And that is the pattern of development. And that they move because they need more land and they need the possibility of finding wives. Now, I would not have thought of this if I didn't have that little child ask me this very strange question. So I'm moving out of the normal space of professors that I will talk to or my own students, young people, people who don't, who, for example, I would have done anything to meet somebody like Sanket while I was writing this book because I'm concerned with this precise part of Karnataka, which is a magical place. We hear about it, I call it the Twilight Zone, where this is the real where North meets South. And interesting things happen in language. You know, Marathi changes, Kannada changes, you know, so you can draw it as a map. That is the Twilight Zone. If I had had a chance to engage, I would have been enriched by this. But this is just first steps. I'm hoping that if I write this, you with better instincts about your languages could say much more. Because it's like when that British linguist discovered that we were speaking things like English in the Caribbean, we were immediately able to say, yes, he's got an interesting point, but I think these are the things he's got wrong. Then we could take it over. And that should happen. Yeah. Oh, you had a second question.
So I had a second question, which is, when I talk about, they came, it's actually men who came from, from Iran or those areas, right? So unless otherwise there is a power equation, right? This is very rarely that the local people will actually tend to get more from other languages, you know. So do you think the power equations are where, probably the southern languages, and it could be vice versa also, because I think the larger community is local, and there are few people coming here and getting married to women here, and of course there will be other factors. So do you think always this happens? Just we can see historically, right? I think here, at least all the written, Kannada written text is highly influenced with Sanskrit, because one is the people who wrote initially are Brahmins who had a lot of love for Sanskrit, and then that's power equation absolutely, and you can see that in other caste people as well. But actual people, what do they speak is totally different. I mean, still, yeah. So question is, whenever you say Creole and all those things, so there is a power equation which influence, you think?
Yes. In fact, I should have found a way to mention this. Yes, because if you think about it, in Kerala, if you go around, or even here, there are people from all parts of India. You'll get somebody from Nagaland coming in. You'll find a person from Orissa. Somebody's come from Uttarakhand, and they're hanging around. They pick up the local language. I know it better in Kerala. They quickly learn Malayalam, and they don't have much of a footprint in the place. Why? Because they came as individuals. And individuals have to blend because they came in search of work. Whereas the Vedic people, and possibly the earliest Zagros men who created infusion, what we call now Dravidians, they had a certain power. And that power need not have only been military. I mean, the Vedic people definitely knew how to win wars. They were constantly fighting for the first 700 years. And then they continued conquering but not fighting among themselves so much after that. But remember that the people came from the Zagros mountains had an advantage in that they knew farming. And farming has one major impact on a place is that it increases the food supply, and people become sedentary and the population increases. So what must have been a small population in the Indus Valley before becomes a large population because of powerful people with a new technology coming in, and most of them being men. And men coming to settle and to have an impact. So, but people who come in without an impact, they get lost in many ways. We don't know everything about, like when we say that people came from Africa, they left an impact on genetics. They captured women, pushed aside local men, with the result that you can still see it in a genetic test that the mother's line goes back infinitely and the father's line goes back to in specific migrations, and we know the dates roughly, and they're matching. Like there's a migration that gave japonica rice into the Gangetic area, and we know there was a migration from Vietnam and Burma 4,000 years ago. That is matching the time that the rice hybridized. That's matching the time that the people got these genes in them. So it has to be people with power, and these are pretty much men, which means it raises a question that were there other people coming in with women who we didn't really notice much. They were not so significant. Yeah.
You. I think last question, if it is okay. So what is the objective? I think he rightly pointed out, there is a lot of power politics and happening, right? The Sanskrit politics it happened, now with Trump in USA, all this purity, what all things happened. So, like as he pointed out, one thing is, like you rightly pointed out, it's not unique. Like all of us are mixed up. So you can't say these are Aryans and Dravidians. Basically we're trying to one objective is you can try to separate and say, what, so this is what orientate, etc. But rather, so what is the objective? Is it academic, objective, or as a humans, right? We all mix together and everything. So probably we should not be hating each other, etc. Either second is your objective, or is just academic purpose. What's your objective?
I'm just a linguist and I've always worked on these migrations. It so happens that people are finding new meaning in what I'm saying. Maybe and geneticists are saying, "Oh, how interesting! We're finding the same things." So, if the geneticists weren't there, I would have been writing the same thing, but minus the genetics. I thought I would talk to archaeologists. I talked to historians. But I think I have a better source of data because I can understand one layer that they can't, which is poor people. Poor people's languages have survived, but poor people's records in history have not survived. So I'm seeing something, I'm seeing a model, and my biggest excitement is it's overturning models in the West about how language, and this has implications for Europe. If you think it happened in North India, it's also happened in Southern Europe. French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Portuguese have the kind of relationship that Hindi, Punjabi, Marathi, Bangla, Orissa, we see the same thing, a continuum of languages based on Prakrit Latin. And this is Prakrit Sanskrit. And so it's something that's happened again and again, and people didn't understand it, didn't get it right. And Europeans are a little like when the Romanians say, we have cases, we have karaks in Romanian because Latin had it. No, you have it because Russian has it. You are in Russian territory, you're in Slavic territory. And they wouldn't like to hear that you have survived with something that sounds very Latin, but it's actually because all the other languages in the area without Latin words have these cases. Russian has it, and it has exactly. So you're getting to see lineages and how things mix. I think we all have something that excites us. This kind of thing excites me. And I know it's heavily political now, so you can't help getting into it. For example, we keep saying Indo-Aryan. I find that very annoying because it's only taking one of the bloodlines, that's the fathers. And even not necessarily even the fathers. Many of the people speaking things like Hindi, Punjabi, Marathi, Bangla, whatever, may not have any genetic relationship with the Vedic people. They're speaking their languages. And similarly, like in the South, there are people in the tribes that have no trace of Dravidian heritage, but they speak a Dravidian language because the politics has absorbed them. So it's good fun for me to see all of this, and that politics has as much a role to play as genetics. And we don't only, we are speaking in English. Nobody in this room, me included, despite what I look like, I'm not English. But we're speaking English, and it has nothing to do with genetics. It's a political thing, because India has historically had elite languages which dominate intellectual work, scientific work, and we still like that only.
Thank you.
So this is this is about when I was reading Trinidad Indians. I got to know that a lot of North Indian population migrated. So is there any South Indian population migrated? And also in North Indian, I know that the Kshatriyas, they migrated. Or is it?
Not so many.
Not so, okay, I might be wrong. So also there are some accounts I read that there are not so Brahmins, but they fake their identity. Is that true?
Okay, two things. They say there are about 10% of South Indians in Trinidad. Maybe it's a little more. Other islands got more. For example, the French-speaking islands, because the South was their base, very few North Indians went, mostly South Indians. We used, the two ports used were what's called Madras and Calcutta. So you could be a South Indian, but you would, just because you went via Madras doesn't mean you could have been somebody who knew about the Golconda and something. And I think, how do you know about this? You're not from, but obviously from some other place, or a name would suggest a person coming from Kerala. So basically, people moved around, and we tagged them by the port they left from. Yeah, and what you're, huh? Who? Which one? If he's a good bowler, he probably Guyanese. We didn't have too many good bowlers, but you'll check it out. And you had another question. Everybody whose name is Maharaj or Maraj in Trinidad has the option to pretend that he was a Brahmin, but he could have been a cook. But he could have been a Brahmin cook. They were not looking for Brahmins. They found that they wanted people who are experienced in farming, and in fact, they stopped taking people from the tribal areas and Bengal because they were not farmers. So when they finally found people in the eastern UP area, that's quite far from the coast. They found these the best ones because two things: they were migrants by nature; they were always migrating to cut people's harvests, and secondly, they were farmers. So that was when. So there would be some, like my family would have been metal goldsmiths, but so all of these are represented in a normal Indian village. So we got a kind of a sample of a normal village there. But there would be a few, like I know I have one ancestor who was definitely he was more slaves even when slave trade is over. So, yeah. Yeah, and Caribbeans, whenever their name is Singh, they'd like to say, actually, I'm a Rajput.
Okay. Thank you, Peggy, for that was very insightful. ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬೋದು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. ಓಕೆ.
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ನಮ್ಮ ವ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಮರ್ಚೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಲೇಖಕಿ ಪೆಗ್ಗಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಇಷ್ಟೊತ್ತು ಮಾತಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ. ಅದರ ಅನುವಾದಕರಾದ ಸಂಕೇತ್ ಪಾಟೀಲ್ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಎರಡೂ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಕನ್ನಡದ ಎರಡೂ ಲಭ್ಯವಿದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಎರಡನೇ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಫಾದರ್ ಟಂಗ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಮದರ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅದು ಕೂಡ ಲಭ್ಯ ಇದೆ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಕೊಂಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
Sure. Yeah. We will do the same.
The Japanese one. Because I am already big overweight.
Sure.
I have been out of it for 1 month, so my bags are heavy with books.